Barth from Flavor Chem manning the camera. So camera is important. Everything that we're doing is being recorded. So when it comes to the question section, if you have a question, please wait until I come to you with a microphone so we can make sure that your question is picked up on the camera for the recording. So Chicago section IFT is the largest section, regional section in the country, and as you know, because you're here, we put on this expo and symposium. And it's my pleasure to introduce our opening keynote speaker, Dr. Erdogan Ceylan. He is the Director of Scientific Affairs at Mérieux NutriSciences. Dr. Ceylan is a seasoned food scientist with 30 years of experience. He's an expert in process validation, challenge and shelf life studies, foodborne pathogen detection, and microbiological risk assessment. He consults on FSMA, HACCP, and sanitation, and oversees Mérieux NutriSciences select programs. A recognized authority, Dr. Ceylan has presented globally, contributed to the Compendium of Methods for the Microbiological Examination of Foods, and published extensively. He is an active member of IAFP and IFT, and a recipient of the 2015 Frozen Food Foundation Research Award. Dr. Ceylan is dedicated to providing expert insights to the global food and beverage industry. Welcome, Dr. Ceylan.
Thank you, Mary. Can you hear me? Perfect. I want to thank everybody for taking the time to join us today, this morning, our presentation. Welcome. And when I present, I walk and talk. And today, I will present a lot of data. If you do have any questions while I'm presenting, please feel free to stop me. Maybe it's better that we have an interactive session. And what I'm going to present today is a little too fast. A data-driven, holistic approach to emerging food risks or risk management. So it's a big word when we say holistic approach. That's what we are going to basically examine today. What we really mean by holistic approach. How is it different from the conventional approach? What are the new things? What are the new emerging things? Not risk, but emerging technologies and science to put everything together for a holistic approach. Okay. So we'll start with the definition of the holistic approach, what it actually means, and then we will dive into two case studies, real-time data. One will be for microbiological risk assessment, one will be for chemical risk assessment. And then we will talk about how do we really do the risk mapping. You might just determine some emerging topics and alerts and noises from the internet and everything, but what it really means for you or for your product or for your operation. And then finally we will wrap everything with this data-driven approach to mitigate the emerging risks. Okay? So traditionally when the emerging risk, we are most reactive. Someone tells that you need to control salmonella, we all get together and say, okay, we're going to come up with a food safety plan and come up with mitigation and control measures. But holistic approach, you will hear this word many, many times today. Anticipates. So the holistic approach anticipates the emerging risk way ahead of time. I have a couple of examples for that too. It is possible to anticipate an emerging risk 6 months ahead of time. So you will be prepared for that risk and you can handle corrective actions. Okay, we will talk about what corrective actions there might be. And it also spans from not only food safety quality team or HACCP team or your sanitation team, but it goes all the way from top to down to floor workers. And it includes actually procurement. and then uses real-time risk mapping. There are ways to, on daily basis, you can monitor the risks around the globe, what's really happening, relevant to your product or your process. And I'm sure you just keep hearing this, digital tools and AI of Internet of Things. It does actually use digital tools and artificial intelligence to anticipate all this risk before they. So these are some of the drivers, not the full list, but I put like 3 categories here. Regulatory updates might drive this emerging risk. It doesn't mean that always a bad thing, challenging thing, because they must lower the detection limits, and now you have to adapt to it. And these are short-term emerging risks. And it could be consumer advocacy type of people. You'll hear a lot of noises, and they might just push the regulators to change limits or eliminate certain contaminants altogether, not even having a tolerance level. And finally, we might have actual true emerging issues that comes from new ingredients, new technologies we use, new processing techniques we use, or simply just because of the evolution of the food industry. Of course, we just keep hearing about extreme weather, high temperatures, and because of that, both ecology of microorganisms are changing. We are facing new pathogens or different variants, or even because of changing ecology, we are facing new toxins. All right. From here on, I'm going to present you a lot of data, and all this data come from our own platform. Okay, and this is not for sales or promotional purpose. This is purely inform you about what's really happening in real world, and you don't have to pay for it. It's free today. So here we go. So we have 3 separate tools, digital tools. First one called Safety Hub. What we do here is that globally we monitor any alerts. It could be a recall, it could be outbreak, it could be some noise on the internet, it could be fraud issues. Everything is being monitored on a daily basis around the world. 85 countries are participating into this program already. They just keep entering information, and this platform screens everything and creates a nice summary and table. And the second tool we have, a limit detector. If you are interested in all the maximum limits by the food category, by the country, or any other factor that you might consider, you can go and search and determine the most recent limits. And the third tool we have, regulatory update. It's the same thing again. It screens the globe if there is any regulatory update on top of the existing ones, and it creates all this. So by using these 3 tools on a daily basis, this is updated on a daily basis. You can just create your own account and create your own filters. Every morning you push a button. You might choose the way that you want it in a table format, a graphic format, a alert format, or you might even email me. And you can see it. And we'll focus on the Safety Hub a little bit today. I just want to emphasize the Safety Hub a little bit more than the others, because this is probably the most useful in terms of checking emerging risk and issues. So it determines any alert around the world on food and food contact services, not only food but food contact services as well. And 85 countries right now are participating, and 130 official sources. If there's any hold at the FDA detention or something, right, it will be there. It will be immediately entered. So you can go, if you want to see all the FDA detention data, you can actually do that. And so far, we started around 2013. This is quarter 1 and 2 data for this year. These numbers are a little bit high right now, but almost 170,000 notices or alerts are in the system. And over 15,000 food fraud alerts are in the system as well. These are a lot of numbers. And you can categorize it any way you want, and you can do actually search it again based on the risk you are interested in and supplier. If you're interested in one specific supplier, if you want to see their history, you can do that. So our first case study is on the chemical contaminants, chemistry. So, as I mentioned, if you become a member of our digital tool, the Safety Hub, and you can create your own filter and your way of reviewing the results. This is, I frequently use myself because when I want to log in, I want to see what's really happening around the globe. So, as if like I'm an astronaut looking at the Earth from space and see what's really happening on my screen. We can color code it and determine in which country you're having high alerts, which country is having more issues with food safety and food fraud. So this is the very top layer of the review that you can have. And you can have, as it shows here, simply number of alerts happening compared to last year versus this year. By the way, number of alerts are increasing. You know, as food safety professionals, we are working really, really hard to control pathogens or contaminants, but alerts are increasing. Is that a bad thing? Probably not, because maybe we have better ways to monitor them. Now, because of the digital tools and the help of AI, we are able to detect them around the globe. Before, we used to go to the library or search and go to the FDA's website, the USDA, and after several rounds of frustration, then you just get one piece of information. But right now, it's just one click, especially if you set your own preferred options, it will be automatically updated. You don't have to do anything. So, this is almost like the peeling the onion type of approach. Now you have a global view of food safety alerts. Now you can go and say, I like to see only chemical contaminants issues happening around the globe. So this is my chart, but you can create your chart any way you want. So this will be updated every morning when you come to the office, and you will see it. Pesticides are the number one, and mycotoxins. And both are on the rise compared to last year and this year. And if you look at the overall numbers, mycotoxins are increasing around 60%. That's a big number. And when we talk about risk assessment, risk management, we are talking about some of the signals as well. Is this a signal for you if one of your products is susceptible to mycotoxins? Perhaps. Then you need to maybe create another chart just to monitor mycotoxins for your product. And pesticide, we try our best to control them, we educate people, still is on the way. And if you are interested in what food categories and country of origin actually contributing to this chemical contaminant issue, right? So here we are, fruits and vegetables and legumes are the number one when it comes to chemical contaminants. And then we have nuts and seeds. And, as you can see, fruits and vegetables and legumes, they're still increasing 19% compared to the previous year. It seems everything is increasing. Even coffee and fish and seafood. And then you can look at which country is actually contributing all these alerts. United States, India, China, Turkey, Egypt. Those numbers can be misleading. It needs to be interpreted well because some countries maybe have more robust sampling plan or other food safety plan in place already, they're testing more and more. And when they test it, they find them, report, and you get higher numbers from those countries. Or maybe they're exporters or importers for that reason. They're analyzing the samples more. They can get more data. If you don't analyze it, it's not going to be reported here and you cannot have the data. So if you want to peel it more and just want to focus on fruits and vegetables, and you can just create a graph for that one as well. Pesticides are no question. So I wouldn't say an emerging risk. It's already emerged. It's there. It's established itself. But it's not going anywhere, at least for now. But if you look at mycotoxins, it doubled, 190% increase in 1 year. We're talking about all these alerts, right? Signals. So this is another big signal that you need to really focus on mycotoxins, especially if you're in fruits and vegetable business. And it's not even slowing down. Sometimes you might see a spike in 1 year, then it goes down, and you might have some outlier years or period during the year, but based on calendar year 2023, 2024, and first 6 months of 2025, mycotoxins is up there. It's once we finish the year, probably mycotoxin this year will be at very, very high levels as well. So this will be another signal and alert for you to consider. And the other thing that we'll talk about a little later, the chemical other, 62% increase. What does it really mean? What's in the other section? And we'll have an example for that too. Because we cannot ignore that. So, and we can dissect this more and more. That's why I was telling you it's like a peeling the onion type of concept. You start the global look and just go down and down and down, all the way to the bottom of the root cause. So if you look at by the food categories, fruits and legumes and herbs and spices, and if you had nuts there too, it's almost like 80%. I drink coffee a lot. I was looking at this chart. I said I was disturbed by this chart because I'm not vegetarian, but I mostly eat vegetables. Almost vegetarian diet, but I love my steak. And I drink a lot of coffee, and I snack on nuts. I said, this chart personally relates to me because I consume all those products, and probably I'm consuming a lot of pesticides by doing that. I thought I was eating healthy. Probably not. So fruits and vegetables, almost 50-50 when it comes to awards. But when you look at the entire chart, you can see that there's almost everything has one way or another some level of pesticide. And that was the fruits and vegetables. We can further dissect this into fruits, if you love your fruits. Right? Certain fruits are standing high compared to others. It's okay to see some variation. You know, we see here that 1 year orange has high pesticide and next year a little bit less, but overall they are on the chart. And apparently pigs have been a headache for the industry, not only for pesticides, but for mycotoxins as well. And this chart clearly shows all the alerts about the pigs around the globe. But if you look at year 2025, strawberries, oranges, grapes, you just named it for this year, but for the previous years, almost every fruit, including eggs, pesticides. Now, there was a big wedge for herbs and spices for pesticides as well. This is why. You can see that if you want to go and see what's really happening with herbs and spices, because when you keep adding into your formula, you just keep adding potentially high levels of pesticides. So it's on the rise again. Mycotoxins increased 64% 4%. Under the mycotoxins, you can just open up a little bit more and see which mycotoxins. You can see that aflatoxins, not ochratoxin that much, but especially aflatoxin is 65%, along with pesticides. And these are the countries that reported all these mycotoxin issues, mostly including US, India, Egypt, China, Iran. So those are the major herbs and spices type of countries. So it's nothing surprising there. As far as nuts goes, peanuts, pistachios, almonds, sesame seeds, sunflower seeds, they all have issues with chemical contaminants, especially nuts with mycotoxins. Sometimes you'll see that, look, we have all these mitigation measures, but numbers are not going down because what happens in some cases, if this year's batch has a lot of mycotoxins, they just hold some and mix with next year's batch to dilute it. You can legally do that. So, but next year when you analyze all those samples, maybe it's below the allowed limit, but still it's going to show as an alert in the mycotoxin. All sorts of that. Talking about mycotoxins, we can just take a look at mycotoxins in fruits only. 240% increase in figs. I was talking about earlier, the figs happens to be a big, big problem, especially when it comes to mycotoxins and pesticides. Why this is happening, we don't know, but the digital tool and AI actually can give you some idea in terms of this big spike in the numbers. And we have one example for that we'll review, and ochratoxin A as well in figs, increasing significantly. So earlier I was saying that we focus on pesticides, mycotoxins, heavy metal, and others, right? What are the others? Should we just ignore them and focus on pesticides? No, we should look at what the others are. This is one example to that. Heavy metals can be grouped under others if we want to, but most importantly, I'm sure you heard about radiation in shrimp recently and some other commodities as well, right? If you look at the FDA's FSMA regulation, it says that one of the hazards is actually radiation. We talk about all this physical, chemical, microbiological, and radiation, because all these alerts and signals showing that globally we cannot just say, oh, we are away from all these nuclear power plants, or there's no radiation around here. That's not the case anymore. We really need to address the radiation in your food safety plan. And it is happening. It is increasing. And as far as the heavy metals go, cadmium happens to be the major problem. And if you look at the percentages, the big portion of this heavy metal is due to cadmium contamination. And we have a very specific example for cadmium contamination. So when we do all these alerts or signals, we can do based on suppliers, based on the commodity, and we can actually screen everything based on the country of origin as well. So we can, remove one more layer of the onion and look at the countries. Why we are seeing all these alerts all the time, and which countries basically contributed to this alert. This is one example to that one. In Turkey, we have really, really high number of alerts coming, followed by China, Egypt, and other countries. There has to be a reason for that. If you remember, one of the digital tools, we said that it regulates the limits and regulatory changes around the globe. Now that the tool becomes very, very useful to explain this graph. So, if you look at Turkey specifically, we can see that there are some regulatory changes in that country. So, pesticides and morale levels are much lower now. So, in the past, when you test it, if it is at a certain level, you don't report it, right? It's a pass. It doesn't pose a risk. And you can sell the product. Now, because of the history, there's more scrutiny. You have more and more testing, and the limits are lower. Now, if you don't fix the problem every time when you test those commodities in Turkey, they're going to come out as positive or fail. And the digital tool will give you an alert saying that there's something wrong in this country. So probably this is going to help in the long run because they're going to figure out and come up with mitigation steps to lower the limits, and it's going to come down. But for now, it's purely a regulatory issue. Hopefully they'll fix it. If they don't fix it, they're going to lose the market. And some others, as you can see here, the EU temporarily increased control measures in those three countries, China, Egypt, and India. That might also contribute all this spikes and high number of alerts coming from those three countries. Talking about countries, if you look at China particularly, you see that chemical contaminants still on the rise, pesticides are on the rise, heavy metals on the rise, lead, heavy metal, particularly lead in heavy metals on the rise, and some other chemicals. And especially pesticides, because all the fruits and vegetables we were talking about, right? They're all affected by that. And metals, seaweed, berries, so many other products. So this is for China, this is also the thing. And then if you look at India, similar issues, pesticides are on the rise again. Raisins, grapes, and dates are the major products affected by that. Any questions so far? Sure.
Is all the things driven off of raw, unprocessed fruits, vegetables, seeds, or is it?
This is everything.
It's everything.
This is everything. Yeah. That's why I was earlier talking about like the peeling the onion.
Yeah.
You can just keep peeling. You can get the bottom of it, whatever that source is actually. Right now, this is just a big picture of what's happening. Those figs, I would presume that they are dry figs. So probably they are treated with some chemicals, well, processed, but not the fresh figs. So processed, yeah. And once they're there in dry form, then it's going to be there for a long, long time. So if you just keep peeling all this data, you will end up getting a report similar to this one. Okay. PFAS. This will be a true emerging issue or emerging risk for you because, as I said, pesticides are on the rise. That's fine, but we already have the pesticide control problem now, with safety plan, with sampling plan, supplier verification plan. But PFAS is a recent issue. So, and almost every food category is being affected by PFAS now. Now it is a really emerging issue for everyone. And radiation. I know that certain companies after that shrimp incidents in Indonesia and countries around there, they started immediately their corrective actions. More testing, finding third-party laboratories around Asia-Pacific to test samples before they come to the US. They are being tested there and they're being tested in the US as well. So those are three emerging issues. This is just one example. Depending on what type of business you are in, you can just dissect all the global alerts and you can end up creating your emerging risk or chemistry. Let's just take a look at microbiological contaminants. So this is again global trends. I wanted to include biological, chemical, physical, allergens altogether because as a company we separate allergens from chemistry. In fact, if you include allergens in the chemical contaminant issue will be very large in reality, but we separate. So chemical contaminants or chemical risks are still much higher than microbiological risks, but we cannot disregard microbiological risk because consequences could be very severe, right? But still, very high number of alerts we are getting for microbiological risk, little less than chemical risk. And when we put everything together, micro, chemistry, physical, allergens, just like fruits and vegetables and legumes are the number one again. Very, very high number of alerts. And it is increasing, right? And then we have prepared dishes, nuts and seeds, mostly attributed to salmonella, and even with milk and dairy products. I'm not entirely sure what's going on with milk and dairy products, but there's an increase there as well. So let's just peel it more for microbiological risks. So this shows food categories by the trend for microbiological or biological risks. As you can see, no surprises. Salmonella is still the number one pathogen, followed by listeria and SEC contamination. As far as the food categories go, meat and poultry, seafood, milk and dairy, and prepared foods. If you add fruits and legumes as well, you are basically talking about 90% of the entire food categories. 4 or 5 different types of food categories, just taking the entire frame in the microbiological risk assessment arena. So, since we talked about fruits and vegetables in the chemical contaminant section, I just want to talk about fruits and vegetables again. If you look at this one, we just keep seeing the same thing. Not sure why it's happening, just talk about it. We come up with solutions, maybe as the industry, and the same issue repeats itself again and again, like tomato, sprouts, and garlic, and banana. If you look at the history, especially tomato, I don't know what is it with tomato that just keeps coming back all the time, not only in one country, globally. It happens in Canada, it happens in the US, it happens in France, in Spain, Italy. So it's on place. And then one of the other things that you can do with these tools, actually, you can take a look at all the outbreaks if that's an interest to you. Right? You can sort of filter and group all the information in the way that you like. So if you look at some of these outbreaks, again, it's the same thing. In EU, salmonella in tomatoes. You just go back to England, salmonella in tomatoes. You can go to Spain, salmonella in tomatoes, like cucumbers. Salmonella in eggs, probably we are talking about for a century already. And we are not able to, other than pasteurization, not able to tackle this issue. So I wanted to share this slide for one particular example, which was that salmonella in eggs. Remember, when you have this digital tool that we have, Safety Hub, and if you are particularly interested in this salmonella in eggs at 134 cases, the digital tool will have one link to it when you screen it. When you click that link, it will open up a page like this, specifically for this salmonella in eggs. And then you're going to get the company name, how many cases, and you can have more clicks down to whatever information you're looking for. So this is the beauty of digital tools and AI. You can get very, very detailed information about it. So now we have all this information, and this was just a snapshot of those digital tools and AI that you can use. Any tool, not ours. But we have all this information. What do we do about it? How do we really utilize it? So the next step will be, next natural step will be risk mapping. Right. When you do risk mapping, you need to consider certain criteria. One of them should be time bound. Is it really relevant? Is it time? Probably, if there's any risk, it's always time. And most importantly, if it is relevant to your product, yes, you might have mental issues, or yes, you might have other mistake issues, but is it relevant to your product or not? If both answers, the answer to both questions is a yes, then you move to the next step, saying that what is the anticipation, how it's going to affect your product. If it is going to be an emerging risk for your product, then you come up with mitigation control or develop proactive strategies to control that risk. So again, these are the three tools that we have, and depending on the risk and relevance and timeliness of it, you can develop a mitigation strategy for a very short-term, mid-term, and long-term evaluation. Right? If you are in a seafood business in Asia Pacific, and if you are trying to export anything to the US right now, radiation contamination should be very short-term emerging risk for you. You have to get together and revise your food safety plan and testing plan, act on it, work on your mitigation plan. Not only if you are grower or exporter, if you are importer, same thing. That will be very, very short-term plan. Mid-term plans are usually regulatory type of risk if there are emerging allergens or emerging pathogens, or maybe limits change, but the government will give you fair amount of time to work on your food safety plan and come up with mitigation strategies. And then the long-term plan will be all these signals that we are talking about, all these alerts that we are talking about, through emerging risks that we are talking about. You should be putting on your long-term plan to come up with a mitigation strategy later. Of course, you need to be monitoring it. If it is just a one-year spike and it never happens again, you should still watch out, but you just keep monitoring. If it is really emerging, once it becomes emerged, now you have to do something about it. Radiation, you've been talking about it for 10, 15 years already. Now it is emerged, so you have to do something about it. And when we talk about emerging risk, then how do we really define the emerging risk? If it happens just yesterday, do I need to worry about it right away? You need to define what will be the emerging risk, right? What we think is that something is happening within the last 12 months. You haven't seen it before, in terms of risk, or in terms of regulatory, or in some cases, consumer advocacy. They might be pushing one agenda all the time. So you might then say, okay, we are getting the signals, alerts. Probably it will emerge sometime soon. You consider strategy against a specific ingredient, for example, removing fat, removing artificial dye or flavor, colors, those type of things. But if it is not happening within 12 months or so, probably we cannot consider that as an emerging issue yet. And some of the other criteria is that companies, especially global companies, alerts, some signals on the internet saying that company XYZ started testing for this, or some international scientific meetings have big agenda on that specific topic, means that something is really happening. And the digital tools or the AI will determine that, saying that these are the hot topics. So I highly recommend that when you go to international meetings or scientific meetings, check out the sections called hot topics, what people are talking about. If there are presentations like that, saying the hot topics are topics, probably it's going to be emerged as risk in the very near future. All right. Again, when you want to do the whole risk assessment, if you choose to use our digital tools, you're going to have a graph like this, and you will dissect this until you find the root cause. But I just want to dive into one specific example here, which is El Nino in the dairy. If you look at it, El Nino alerts in the world, in EU, particularly influence is going up. And this pie chart shows how much of it is due to listeria, salmonella, E. coli. But I'm more interested in actually the other food safety alerts. What is it really happening in that other section, which is almost 43% of that? We cannot ignore, right? That's where emerging things are happening. We already know what's happening with salmonella and listeria. One other thing that I want you to consider when you do on emerging risk, E. coli is slightly different than salmonella and listeria because it evolves really fast. It mutates really fast. And some non-pathogenic strain may become pathogenic, or they might produce toxin. You know, we talk about Aztec strains, which we used to talk about only the 15787, then we said Aztec top 6 and 8 and 10. Just the Aztec list is getting longer and longer and longer. For that reason, I will watch out E. coli alerts. So if you look at more detail to this, then we say, okay, we did all these screening around the globe using digital tools, AI, and I want to do my risk assessment. This is where we start. We put the risk, we don't know what that risk is yet. Right in the middle of this graph, relevance to your business, your product, and emerge versus emerging, okay? Right now, we don't know anything. We put the risk right in the middle. And then I'm not going to go through the whole this thing again. Once you use those digital tools, you will end up getting something like this. Because we talked about the salmonella, listeria, pesticides, allergens, right? You might say, we already know that. Why are we talking about them? Well, we talk about them because they are under emerged risk category already. So we should be having some mitigation for and preventive controls for those already. That's given. What we are interested in is that, as you can see here, I was talking about it earlier, if we are having new aspects, because when the known aspects are already here, for dairy particularly, right? That's very, very high relevance. Listeria is very, very high relevance, but maybe some aspects are emerging from different type of food categories. We need to watch out. It is emerging, we know that because it is associated with different type of products. Is it relevant to dairy products yet? Probably. We need to watch out. Sooner or later, it's going to find its way into dairy products. And if you are using recycled water, for example, recycled water or treated water, endocrine disruptors are very, very common. Right? Depending on how well you treat the water when you recycle it, if you're using it as an ingredient versus utility water. If it is an ingredient that if you're using for CIP, food allergens or microplastics. You just keep hearing about plastics every day, right? Is it relevant? It is emerging definitely for the entire industry, not only in the food industry, but pharma, medical. Everyone is talking about microplastics. Is it relevant to data products? Maybe. Eventually, you're going to have some mitigation strategy for that. And next one is, well, since we talked about fruits and vegetables today, we have already emerged issues, and we have some emerging issues here. If you remember, we talked about PFAS, right? It's an emerging issue we are talking about. So PFAS actually moving to the left in every category now. It's going to become an emerged issue, and we will have it in our food safety plan already and work on preventive controls for it already. All right, so these are all good. How do we then put everything together and have an holistic approach to have safe food? So this last section basically talks about that. Totally data-driven approach to mitigate emerging risks. Now, this graph shows basically how do you really manage emerging topics, emerging risks. So you have all these drivers on the left side, state regulations, and feedback from the industry, outbreaks, and all other events. It's just feeding information here. This is your decision-making step. You're getting all these feedbacks here, and then you have your internal dynamics. So you have your risk management team, risk assessment team, you have your sample collection, testing, internal or external data. You just have your own internal dynamics, so you're constantly evaluating and saying, monitoring, reassessing, saying that in some cases you might not be sure, saying that, okay, I need to put into this my qualification of the risk bucket, and I'm going to also evaluate all the external information to understand or make a decision if there's an emerging risk,
like risk and stuff,
or what I need to do. But there's one thing missing here. Something fundamental is missing here. We are talking about external feedback or noises, and we are talking about your internal data. So you're company A, but you don't know what's really going on with company B, for example. They are doing their own testing. So I call them silos in the food industry. We are a third-party testing now. We're NutriSciences. We have 60 years of data. You imagine how many millions of samples we have in 60 years. So we have the data, we cannot share because of data. Same thing with other companies. They have their own data. In fact, we were talking to one company saying that we have so much data, we don't know where they are at, for example, right? And we don't know what to do with them. If you're talking about global companies, they have North America headquarters, they have Europe, Asia Pacific, they have all their own research, testing, collecting all the COAs and putting somewhere. They do research, put it somewhere. They cannot communicate among themselves either. And none of those data included in this risk qualification evaluation. Unfortunately, it's sad. If you just do this based on your own data within your group, then your qualification will be not so robust. So, to solve that problem, our company came up with a solution, basically, to fix this problem. As you can see here, you can get all this food safety alerts that we talk about, third-party lab, your internal data, but you need to also get external data. And we call it trusted third-party initiative for that one, meaning that we are actually creating this in a way of club, in a way of union. What happens is that it's a new business model. Members come together anonymously. Nobody knows who's putting data in. It's almost like a data bank. Okay? And they come together, collaborate. All the data is put together into one platform. And then you go into the data bank, you have access to much larger data. Thinking about top 10 global food companies. God knows how much data they have already. Why do you just keep repeating, reinventing the wheel? So this is what we are recommending. We have a good number of members already, partners, we call them, partner companies. They are putting all the data in. What happens is that you put company 1 enters that data, company 2 enters, and we need to have at least 3 companies for the specific group, because otherwise, if it's only 2 companies, if it's 1 company, you don't need it, because you can just evaluate your own data. If it's a 2 company, you know your data, then you will have direct visibility to other companies' data. Right? We don't want to make it anonymous. For each food category, we want to have at least 3 members. Until we find the 3rd member, it's not active, it just sits idle. So, what we do, we put all the data we have. And we use all digital tools that I mentioned, screen, globe. We dump all the data in there. And these participating partner companies, they also put all data in there. And this AI non-stop interprets the data, normalize the data, and determine risks, emerging risks based on that. And it has many, many benefits of it. Right? One of the benefits is that God knows how many times I get that question. They say, what do you think other companies do about this specific issue, specific topic? Of course I cannot say that, even though I might know what other companies do. We are not allowed to say that. By being part of this trusted third-party platform, you have access. You don't know who's who, but you have access to everything. This platform will include frequency of sampling, acceptance level, detection level, how many samples or sample size, what method people use, in which country, or which country is having more issues. So you have total access, visibility to everything. So you now know your peers, what they do, your peers what they do. And you can do, with the system, provides, as far as I remember, 15,000 types of reports you can generate. 15,000 types. You can ask 15,000 different questions to that platform, and it will answer almost like ChatGPT, right? You just write it, it will tell you, saying that I'm interested in the specific ingredient coming from China. What are the analysis that people do, how frequently, and the sample size, what method. Boom, everything will give it to you. Something. And most importantly, since we have all this historical data, I mentioned this earlier too, this AI system will anticipate what's really happening, or what will happen in the very near future, because it has all this historical data. So this is a specific example of that. This is cadmium. Remember, cadmium was problems in heavy metals category. This is a true example, cadmium in cocoa beans. You see all the heavy metals here, it's a little blurry, but you see the cadmium ups and downs, and you might be wondering why this is happening, right? And what this system does that monitors fertilizer uses around the world, because certain fertilizers contribute to cadmium contamination. Screens all this mining industry and their proximity to agricultural farms. Especially if you go to some countries, cocoa bean growers are small families. They have maybe a few trees. And maybe they're not necessarily monitoring what's really happening around them. Wherever they can grow, they grow and harvest it. If you are close to the mining industry, or if there's a heavy use of fertilizers, or the pH of the soil actually in some countries contributes that trees might absorb heavy metals faster depending on the pH. So this trusted third-party AI monitors and evaluates all this data, all this feedback, that tells you that 6 months from now, if you buy cocoa beans from this country X, from this region, because of all these issues going on, you might have high cadmium in that 2026 crop in this specific region. So what do? You just work with your suppliers. You just say, okay, I'm going to find a different supplier in a different continent, in a different country. So that's why earlier we said that we anticipate. It is very, very doable. You can anticipate things before it's happening. This is one example. It can be applied for any other contaminants and microbiology issues as well. With that, that concludes my presentations. I'm happy to take any questions if you have time. Yes, there is some questions.
Does this platform provide any granularity to supplier sites
Yes.
and the testing that they're doing so that we can look at regulatory limits from a factory scope?
Yeah. Well, we are asking about TTP, right? This one. So, let's go back here. We have 3 partners. And this is AI. AI will determine what's in the data bank. We encourage our partners to put as detailed as possible the information, all the way to supplier level. And you can go to country. In some cases, we did some test runs. We can determine which plant in this specific country, it was a dairy case that we have found. We were able to locate which plant actually in that country was causing that spike. It is doable. But again, there's partnering companies, they need to put that info. They need to be really transparent. Otherwise, AI will determine, but if you put on the country, it will say at the country level, state level, or city. But in some cases, some partners are really, really very transparent. They put everything and you can determine the plant level, which plant is causing the spike. So you can, take corrective action, just go and talk to those people saying, hey, we are observing this, and you have to fix it. Very good question, thank you.
I have a question. Are there specific test methods that Mérieux has seen an increase in, such as mycotoxins or pesticides in the last year?
Specific methods, you said? It's an evolving industry, right? What we do, I wouldn't say specific, but we do a lot of metrics, verification, or extension if we have concern about one specific product, and if we have variations. What we do, we employ different methods of assays to optimize the detection. That's what we do.
Well, we are at time. Thank you very much, Dr.
You're welcome.
Ceylan. We have a 10-minute break. Bathrooms are through those doors. Looks like the coffee table is secured or moved.